guys, this PowerPoint presentation is on ancient China, so make sure that you fill in the notes that I gave you, and let's start. First, we need to talk about the geography of China during the ancient times. This civilization is located in Northeast Asia, and that's going to be right up here by the Yellow Sea. The Yangtze River and the Huanghe River, also known as the Yellow River, are two very important rivers to these civilizations. They provide very fertile land for agriculture and, of course, water that they can drink from. This river, like the Nile, floods every spring, and it does bring a lot of devastation to the people of China. The floods destroy their crops sometimes or their homes, but they still depend on that flooding for the rich soil that it leaves behind. China is very isolated because it has a lot of natural barriers. It's surrounded by deserts, and it also has a lot of oceans and seas over here on this border, and they have the Himalayan mountains on the west side. So they don't get a lot of interaction with other civilizations like the way the Mesopotamian and the Indus Valley and Egypt interacted with one another. For the most part, they're very isolated. Their religion are known as the Three Ways. They honored the ghosts of their ancestors daily. They looked up to their ancestors and to people who are older. They respected them greatly. And there are three major religions or philosophies that are practiced in ancient China. One of them is Taoism, and that came around the 6th century, and it was founded by a man named Su from the Su dynasty. His name is Lao Tzu. And he believed in a harmony, a balance between nature and humans. And that's the yin and yang. This symbol represents harmony, a balance. And everybody should be looking to find a balance within themselves and nature. In Confucianism, that one's not actually a religion, it's more of a philosophy. And that came around 551 BCE. It's based on the strict teachings of a man named Confucius, and he had very strict rules about the way people should behave in society, and it guided a lot of the decisions made in politics and in everyone's everyday life. Honor and morality were very important. So if you remember the movie Mulan, if you've ever seen it, Mulan had to behave a certain way according to their beliefs, and this is where this idea comes from. Confucianism was the guiding principle of some of the behaviors and expectations that people had to exhibit. And Buddhism came around 563 BCE. That one actually, if you remember from our previous lecture on the Indus Valley, originated in India, and it spread to China because of trade and cultural diffusion. So let's talk about some of the achievements of the ancient Chinese. These people were actually very, very intelligent and were very advanced compared to the other civilizations that we've talked about. Their inventions include things like paper and silk, gunpowder, porcelain, even the compass. Their system of writing is known as calligraphy, and it was produced during the Shang dynasty. They were very advanced in medicine. They practiced acupuncture. That's when they put needles in different parts of your body to help heal you or bring you relief if you have some pain. They have preventative medicine during this time, things that you could do to avoid getting sick, and vaccinations also came about in ancient China. The pagodas, which is this picture that you see here, is a form of architecture, and it was an idea that was also brought from India. So through trade, they're trading a lot of ideas, and this architecture is one of them. And they were used for Buddhist temples. So people who worship a Buddha would go in here and practice their religion. Another great achievement of the ancient Chinese is the Great Wall of China, which is what's pictured right over here. And it was built during the Qing dynasty to protect against invasion. That way they could keep the Mongolian invaders out and protect the people. And it's a great achievement because it took many, many years to build, and a lot of people died making this wall. And it's one of the features one of the great tourist destinations of China today. Okay, so when we talk about politics, ancient China was ruled by dynasties, and dynasties are like monarchies. They're families that their descendants, whoever the heir is, continues to rule, so that's passed down to your family members. And these people establish their control by the mandate of heaven. That means that they are given the right to rule. The gods have allowed them to rule. The gods want them in power. That's what gives the ruler their power. And the dynastic cycle is that dynasties are replaced if the rulers fall out of favor with the gods. So if a lot of bad things plague the society, like there are droughts or invasions or wars or famine, and the people become unhappy with the ruler, then they blame it on the idea that the gods do not want him in power anymore. And so that dynasty is then replaced by another one. So here's a picture, a diagram of the dynastic cycle. And it happens over and over again. So a new dynasty comes into power. They restore peace, they bring people into order, they appoint officials, and they redistribute their lands. They build canals and irrigation systems and roads, and they make everything better for the people. After several generations, so after several rulers have passed, the new dynasty becomes an aging dynasty, and they begin to neglect the duties of the government. They ignore corrupt officials who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they lose control of provinces. They start to impose heavy taxes to pay for luxuries and bigger palaces, and they allow the defensive walls to decay, so they stop paying attention to those protections. And the aging dynasty eventually is going to lose the mandate of heaven. The gods are no longer going to want this ruler to be in power, according to the ancient Chinese. So a lot of problems come. You have floods and famine or earthquakes. You get invasions. You have armed bandits that are raiding the provinces, and then the peasants begin to revolt. So a new dynasty overthrows the current dynasty and takes their place. And now you have the cycle beginning again. So a new dynasty takes place and everything starts over. And that's the dynastic cycle. Let's talk a little bit about the dynasties that ruled ancient China. First, there's the Xia, and they were in power around 2000 BCE. There are no written records of the Xia, and you can see how small they were. They were right here in the eastern part of China. They were very advanced and very deeply religious, but we don't know a whole lot about them because there are no written records that have been found. The Shang and the Chu dynasties came around 1700 BCE, and they ruled during what's known as the Bronze Age. So there were a lot of technological achievements that came out of this dynasty. And then you have the Qin dynasty that came on in 221 BCE. And they're actually going to expand greatly. And they're a very, very powerful dynasty. They controlled every single aspect of Chinese life. So they told people what they could do, what they couldn't do. They had a lot of control over their people. The Han dynasty is going to expand even further, and they begin to trade with Rome along what is known as the Silk Roads, and we'll talk about those further. And education to the Han was very important, so they did make sure that they contributed to getting children educated, particularly boys. And then you have the Tang dynasty, and the Tang dynasty came around 600 CE, and they experienced what is known as the Golden Age of China, and that is called the Golden Age because a lot of literature and dancing and inventions and music and scroll painting and art came out of this dynasty. So it is very famous for all of the things that they produced culturally. Let's talk a little bit about the economy of China. There are four major professions that people in China performed. There were scholars, farmers, artists or craftsmen, and merchants. And everybody had their specific roles that they had to abide by. The Silk Roads are very important to China's economy. They are roads, and they're not just roads, they're routes, and some of them are sea routes. And they travel from ancient Rome to ancient China. And they trade luxuries along these roads. Not only do they trade luxuries, remember they trade ideas. That is where Buddhism comes from, and also the pagodas. They're exchanging ideas as they travel along these roads. There's a high demand for Chinese silk in the West. So China becomes a destination that a lot of people from the West want to go to because there is a lot of things that they can obtain from the Chinese, and merchants can get very rich from them. And that is what we call cultural diffusion, the sharing and spreading of ideas. So not only are they taking all these luxuries along the Silk Road with them, they're sharing their thoughts, their ideas, and they're spreading all of these different influences throughout the entire area that the Silk Roads traveled through. Now let's talk about the social structure of the ancient Chinese. Women, for instance, were inferior to men in the ancient Chinese culture. Their marriages were arranged. They didn't get to choose who they married. The wife was expected to obey her husband, and her ideas and her opinions were not important. Children did receive an education, but it was only boys who went to school. Remember that girls don't have the same status. Another practice that we can talk about as far as social structure is concerned is the idea of foot binding. Foot binding was a sign of beauty. It was very painful for girls, and it was made illegal in the early 1900s because it distorted girls' feet and allowed them not to walk. All right, sorry about that. Clothing and jewelry were worn by both men and women. People wore tunics, and their shoes were a status symbol. So shoes were very ornate. You can see that they have a lot of designs, very intricate. And jewelry was worn both by men and women, like I said earlier. Alright, so this is the social structure of the ancient Chinese. At the very top of this pyramid, you have the emperor. And the first class, those are his nobles, his government officials. The second class is made up of the peasants. Beneath them are the artisans. And then the fourth class are the merchants. And you have the slaves at the bottom. You can see it's a little bit different than what we're used to, having peasants so high up. But the ancient Chinese valued the work of the peasants because those are the ones who are feeding people. And merchants were actually at the bottom because they felt that merchants were corrupted by greed. All right, and that's the end of our slideshow. Make sure you fill in those notes. Remember that we'll have a quiz on this, and if you have any questions, write them down and ask me at the beginning of class tomorrow. All right, thank you.